Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tank12, however you call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks. Today we're going to be taking a quick look at the Tier 10 vehicles that were buffed. That's 4 of them. It's the T57 Heavy Tank, the Centurion Action 10, the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen, and finally the Rinoceronte. We're going to be talking about the changes, and then we're going to have some gameplay where we can actually see if these changes did have an impact on the vehicle itself, or if they are just negligible and you actually don't really notice them. The T57 Heavy Tank is the first vehicle we're going to take a look at. This vehicle is known for its really good fast reload time, 4 rounds and only 2 seconds intra-clip reload. This is a very deadly machine. If you catch someone off guard and you're able to penetrate them, this tank can destroy you very quickly or take at least 1600 HP off your bar. So what did they do? Wargaming deemed that the aim time was too high, so they reduced it to 2.7 seconds. They improved the reverse speed, giving it now 14 kph in reverse. You can actually see that I'm currently using a turbocharger class 1 because the gun is already very good in terms of dispersion values and aim time. So I thought, you know what, I don't really need anything to give me more of a boost like accuracy, and I'd much rather have more mobility, so I actually did mount the turbocharger, which gives me an additional 2 kph reverse. So 16 kph now in reverse if you're using the turbocharger class 1, and that is really very nice. Your tank can reverse much faster than other heavy tanks, and that also means as a heavy tank with an auto-loading system, you can always rush back faster behind cover when you've spent your entire clip. So I really like that change. They also reduced the amount of gun dispersion during movement and halt reverse down to 0.22, and they reduced it by 0.03. So that's a very nice thing as well, because the tank prior did have a little bit of a problem with, when you're turning your vehicle or your gun, it does take a while for your accuracy to come in. But to be fair, I always use the vertical stabilizer class 1, and since I've used that, I don't really have any problems with that. But maybe I still think you have to utilize the vertical stabilizer, because even though it has been buffed, I still think 0.22 is a very long time for your reticle to become smaller. Moving on to the Centurion Action 10, this tier 10 British medium tank, which I just dismounted my camo, what was it called? The camouflage thing right here, the exhaust system. Actually, I really liked before. You can see I had to retrain my crew because I was playing the tier 9 again, so I had to move them back into the tier 10. But this vehicle, in my opinion, was already pretty good, but it might have not been just strong enough in comparison to other vehicles such as the UDIS 1516 and the STB1. Both of these vehicles, I had the feeling, were a bit superior, and this tank just didn't really have anything special in it. I think it's a very good all-rounder. The entire Centurion line is a very good all-rounder kind of base, and I think they did improve the tank by quite a large margin. They reduced the reload time by 0.6 seconds, so you now have better DPM, better rate of fire. They reduced the dispersion on the turret traverse, so your tank is a lot more accurate, or it was already pretty accurate prior if you were turning your vehicle or the turret, but now it's like really super accurate when you're turning your vehicle. So you almost have no dispersion, it's like 0.08. Top speed has been improved by 2 kph. You can see I am using the turbo, so I do get the +5, and it gives me 60 kph. That means that this tank now is in a really good place where it's very mobile, it's very flexible, and can get you from place A to B without any hassle. And I really like that. They also did decrease the dispersion during movement and halt reverse, so that means your tank has become even more competitive, and I think it's just very slick. It feels very fluid. Whenever you're playing the Centurion Action 10 now, it feels like it's a proper tier 10 medium tank, where anything you do feels like it's at the top of the tree, and it's really responsive. I like that. I like this vehicle. I didn't really think it was needing a buff all that much, to be fair, but it's nice to see that the Centurion Action 10, which prior was alright, was pretty good in my opinion still, did go to a pretty good tank now, a very good tank in my opinion. One vehicle that certainly needed a bit of a buff was the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen, which is a tier 10 German light tank. This vehicle right here, in my personal humble opinion, this was a tank that I always liked to play, but it felt really awkward playing it because it's a very big light tank, it's easy to spot, and it just kind of felt off. Whenever you're driving this tank, it felt like you were constantly flipping over, the weight was weirdly distributed, and all the other vehicles that we had at tier 10, the other light tanks felt more responsive, they felt more competitive, and Wargaming finally did something about that. So this vehicle has gotten some major buffs. This tank now has 8 seconds reload time, making it actually a lot more user-friendly when you're using the gun. This is the best gun out of all of the light tanks, I think, next to the Manticore. This vehicle has like a really competitive gun, 242 millimeters of penetration, 1,200 meters per second shell velocity, 280 millimeters of penetration with the heat shell, and 120 millimeters of penetration with a high explosive round. Now, that high explosive round is really nice if you're fighting against other light tanks, especially since most of the time they don't have the armor, but it kind of steps up closer now, or is at least a little bit more competitive compared to the T100 LT, which just completely eats this tank for breakfast still, but prior was just way, way, way better than right now. This is my full-on light tank setup that you can see, where I'm just going for spotting, like passive scouting, and it's really nice. This tank has become incredibly accurate. They reduced the dispersion to 0.33. They improved the aim time to 1.4, and you can see I have a 1.26 second aim time, so it's like really incredibly fast. They reduced the dispersion values by 0.02 or 0.04, so this tank does not need any kind of dispersion benefiting equipment, for example vertical stabilizer or improved aiming or improved rotation mechanism. Although, to be fair, this tank is a bit weird whenever you're driving it. The traverse speed, although it is like at 66.98 degrees per second, I have the feeling that this tank does lock the traverse speed or lock the tracks whenever you're going like a fast, like let's say 70 kph per hour or 70 kph because the tank just doesn't feel as responsive still when you're trying to go like make a sharp turn or something like that. I just feel like the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen still suffers a bit from maybe the weird balance, maybe just its length. That could be an issue. But I think the tank now is a lot more fun. It's a lot more responsive, and I think it's a very nice change for the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen. Now finally to the Rinoceronte. Before we jump over to the gameplay, I'm going to have every little section marked so you guys know exactly which tank is where. And the Rinoceronte is actually probably the one tank that I do think where Wargaming did screw up the balancing. I would have much rather seen more improvements on the Rinoceronte than on the Centurion Action 10, because I think the Rinoceronte needs it more. This tank has horrible dispersion when you're turning the vehicle, and I think Wargaming didn't address that at all. So whenever you're playing the Rinoceronte, you have really great dispersion when you're stationary. You have like 0.3, so it's like pinpoint accurate. It's almost as accurate as the Leopard 1, maybe even better. But the issue is whenever you turn your vehicle, you notice that the dispersion values are going through the wall. That's why you really need like equipment pieces to help you with gun dispersion when you're turning, because it's not when you're stationary. When you're stationary, this tank is much better than when you're turning. But since you always have to turn your turret to shoot something that is moving, something on the side when you're moving to another place, it's just really awkward, and it kind of destroys the entire pacing, and it's no fun. So you are kind of still well, you still kind of have to utilize equipment to help you with dispersion, like vertical stabilizer class 1, and also improve rotation mechanism class 1 to help you with that horrible dispersion when you're turning a vehicle. And I think this has really helped me in my gameplay. What I like is that they improved the reverse speed to 15 kph, so you can pull out of combat real quick in comparison to other heavy tanks. I think it's rather fast. The shell velocity has been improved for the heat shell. It is now 925 meters per second, but to be fair, you are kind of, well, you're kind of forced to use the heat shell in a lot of scenarios, so you kind of have to utilize that. And intuition, although it's an auto reloader, intuition is not all that helpful. It's still better to have intuition than nothing. But they've improved the frontal turret armor by 20 millimeters. One of the issues, though, is whenever you're using the gun depression, the gun swivels out of its compartment up here, right? And then it becomes a very easy place to shoot through and to kind of splash on with heat. So that's like the place where you're just going to be able to eat through the Rinoceronte, and Wargaming haven't changed anything on that. So I have to say the buffs here would have been better if we had like the mobility, the reverse speed. Then they improved the armor at least a little bit on top of the gun. And then finally, one more thing that I really think is kind of necessary on this vehicle is that they either improve the DPM by reducing the reload time, because the reload time on this vehicle it's insane, 14.5 seconds. Or they improve the average damage, the alpha, to 530. If they improve the average damage to 530 per single shot, I think that's already much better, because your DPM is going to go up. You can keep the same reload time, but it's kind of a buff to the vehicle. But at the same time right now, I think it takes forever to reload. And that would have been a really nice thing to see, because you have 2,000 damage per minute with this vehicle. This is a tier 10 heavy tank, right? If we compare it to other tier 10 heavy tanks real quick, I think there are not a lot of them that have 2,000 damage per minute. Like even the Mouse and the E100 have 2,600, right? And I know it's an auto reloader, okay, obviously, so it's not going to have the same amount of, like, the same DPM like a single shot tank, but it's insanely slow. Like, I found myself in situations where I get, like, attacked and I have to keep an eye on my auto reloader, right? So I don't want to fire all my rounds. And then I also have like this horrible long reload time for the rounds in between, and like 4 seconds as well. It's kind of weird. You want to keep your distance, but at the same time, sometimes you have to go into like close quarter fighting. And I just think that the Rinoceronte could have gotten some other buffs that improved the DPM, maybe decreased the reload time a little bit, and then the tank would have been much more enjoyable. Maybe also like buff the dispersion values while moving, and then you're gonna have a really good tank, right? Like it has some weak spots, it has the auto reloader function, and in the end, everything kind of comes together. But right now, the Rinoceronte is still a little bit of a disappointment, and I wouldn't have expected Wargaming to go this route and not really buff it the right way. Let's put it like that. Either way, we're going to jump into some gameplay. This is going to be a longer video because I really wanted to delve into all of this, and I want to make one video for all of the vehicles. And hopefully you guys just have like the different timestamps where you can go and look and watch whatever kind of vehicle you want to see in the gameplay, and then you can obviously, always switch. See you guys in the gameplay, so be right back. We're going to start off with one gameplay of the Rinoceronte, where we're going to talk a little bit about the changes that Wargaming have made to the vehicle and why I think that they are just not good enough. This tank was changed in the sense that it is now faster in reverse. I think they added 2 kph on top of it, and you actually do feel that. This tank never really had a problem, in my opinion, with mobility, but having a better reverse speed is still fairly nice. The tank itself also got 20 millimeters of more turret armor. Now these cheeks here are 20 millimeters thicker, but one of the main things that I think Wargaming forgot about is that the gun actually is one of the main weak spots. You can see that little notch on top of the gun. whenever somebody like lifts or lowers the gun, that notch becomes a pretty flat surface. It's a very easy place to penetrate this vehicle if you're firing heat. Since we're playing World Tanks in the year 2023, a majority of the player base will be firing heat at your tank. So it doesn't really help you that you have 20 millimeters more armor on the side of the turret. In that kind of scenario, I think Wargaming did drop the ball quite a bit. The one thing I would have liked to see on the Rinoceronte was an increase in DPM, either by improving the alpha damage or, on the other side, improving the reload speed. Because I think this is the main issue with this vehicle. This tank just doesn't do enough damage. It doesn't feel like it is flexible enough to fight back at the right times because the reload time is just really, really long. And I think it makes it quite difficult to grasp this tank and play it in an offensive role. It makes it a much more viable option to stay far away from the battlefield and snipe because your accuracy is still very good. But at the same time, your dispersion values are still fairly bad. You can see I did mention the equipment, and the equipment is only there to give you additional protection, not additional protection, but additional dispersion values. But yeah, the damage output is still fine, right? But having a 14.7 second reload time for a single round is just really atrocious, as you can see here. It takes really long for us to reload a single shell. But we are stunned by artillery right now, so that is not the true number. The true number is, it's, I think 14.7 seconds for the first round. It goes down to maybe 10 seconds for the third one. So you really do not want to spend too many of your rounds. You can see the M48 Patton penetrated us. A GWE 100 did hit us and did quite a bit of damage, 400 HP worth of damage right there. And now we're looking at, 1,264 HP, so we lost about almost half of our HP in that scenario. Now, because of the long reload, I kind of always look, when do I fire? Am I going to be taking, pop shots? Am I going to take these shots where I don't exactly know if it's going to be a successful penetration or not? That's where I kind of decide to wait and not always fire the gun. But that also means, because of the pace of the games nowadays, where the games go through really, really quickly, you're not going to end up with a lot of damage, at least in this vehicle. It just seems to me that the damage that we do is kind of minuscule in comparison to other tier 10 heavy tanks, such as even the Maus or the T110E5. They all have much better DPM. They have less alpha, but they have much better reload time. But you can obviously not really compare them one-to-one because they are not auto-reloaders. But even the auto-loaders, in my opinion, are going to be doing better than this tank. Expending 2 rounds into one target here just shows you just how long the reload time is. And to be fair, in a situation like this, you just want to get the damage off because it's not going to be lasting. These vehicles will be overrun in a moment. And you can see, 268 millimeters of penetration. It's very good, right? But the mouse is angled a bit. We're not able to go through right through him, so we would have to switch over to heat rounds to really be effective. And we cannot even track the mouse somehow. I'm not sure. He probably has, the equipment to reinforce his tracks as well. But it's just not a very nice feeling, and it's just not a very nice experience, in my opinion. There's just too many things that bother me. I can handle a tank that is slow. I can handle a vehicle that doesn't have the best amount of armor, but I cannot handle a tank that has a gun that is just kind of is really great in most of the aspects, penetration, accuracy, but it's just kind of lackluster in other terms, like reload time, DPM, because you kind of are reliant on these factors if you want to have good games. Because nowadays, a lot of the games, the majority of the games go through really, really quickly, and you just need to be a bit more, in the fight. So I think if they would improve the rate of fire, if they would have improved the alpha damage, maybe, this tank would be a lot more viable in my opinion. But so far, since like it's really kind of reduced in effectiveness, this tank just is not going to be able to take a better and bigger role opposed to other vehicles at the same tier. Even though it's not entirely a bad tank, it's just an underwhelming vehicle, and I think that fits pretty well. Even after the changes, I still think it's an underwhelming tank that still needs a bit of work. And that work would be great if they would add just that bit of DPM to it, and I think this tank could be much, much, much better in that sense. Still, we managed to do 3,000 damage, but like 2 rounds went into an IS-7 that was AFK. Sadly, that's something we'll see much more often now, AFK tanks all over the place. But I think we're going to jump on over to the next tank. We're going to take a look at the Centurion Action 10 now, and we're going to talk about those changes that they have done for the vehicle. Okay, so for the next vehicle, we're looking at the Centurion Action 10 in gameplay. And this is a pretty basic game in this vehicle, and to be fair, as I mentioned prior, I think this tank didn't really need a buff, but this buff has now elevated from a good tank to a great vehicle in my opinion. And that's always nice to see, because this is a vehicle that has great DPM now, decent mobility, like better mobility than it had before. It has enough protection to at least allow you some bounces on the turret, but not enough that it's like overpowered. And it's also like very versatile if you need to spot or be hidden. You can snipe, you can be close by, and it has a lot of things that make it a very good all-rounder. And we can immediately see we're playing on Erlenberg, and we're taking up a very aggressive position here, and we get lucky because Rinoceronte and the IS-7 are both playing very aggressively here, and it just allows us to really farm their HP. And because they are obviously kind of stuck there if they don't move, they have to get to that position as fast as possible, and you can see we have already taken away like 1,500 HP almost of both of these vehicles. That's what you want, you want that really brutal DPM, and you just want that very nice, reliable 105mm gun that does the damage, that hits the targets, and that is always as accurate as possible. And I think with the Centurion Action 10, you now have that vehicle. Right next to us, the Rinoceronte on our team gets absolutely wiped because a FV1803 just hit him very hard. So yeah, basically now we're just trying to fight for the 1-2 line, and the next target is going to be this M5Y because he's right next to us. He has a very good reload time, so very high DPM, but we're going to have some support and we're going to be able to take care of him. Yeah, this tank has also heat shells available to it, like the tier 9 counterpart on the other hand with its 105mm gun, the L7, the very first modern main battle tank rifled gun, actually doesn't have like heat shells for the tier 9 at least. It only has HES shells, but these premium HES shells are also very good because they have very high pen and they're ridiculously strong when you have tanks that have no armor at all. So yeah, basically we clean up the 1-2 line, and now it's all about following this AMX 13105. This guy wants to clean up the forest that is on the K line, and as you can see, the majority of the enemy team is either on the other side or in the middle, and there could be only one tank that is on the K line, and that is a FV183, because it's the only vehicle that hasn't been spotted yet. And yeah, I think the majority of the players will not reposition as quickly as we are pushing right now. So I do go forward and I do tell the AMX 105 that we're going to help him out. And having that mobility now to 60 kph with the turbo, it's really pretty. It's really nice to have because it makes this tank just so much more responsive when you're playing with other medium tanks that have the mobility. And now you're also one of those tanks that can keep up with those faster ones. You're not going to be as fast as the AMX, the Batchat 25T, right? Obviously, you're not going to be having that kind of speed because you still have more armor than him. but you're at least going to be able to keep up with other vehicles such as like the Object 140 and the Object 430. You're going to be faster than them even. And now you can see, just like if you're sniping, look at that reticle, look at the dispersion values that we have on this vehicle. It's really, really accurate, and it doesn't have any issues with, you know, bad dispersion when turning the vehicle or the turret. But that was never an issue with the Centurion Action 10, and that's why I don't really see why they buffed it. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's still fairly balanced in that sense. It's just a very good choice now. It's a great pick in my opinion. And it's a lot of fun, you know. I've liked to play the Centurion Action 10 before, but now it's like almost pretty much a brain dead pick. Like when you want to play a vehicle that is reliable and has a good gun, go ahead, play the Centurion Action 10. You don't have to worry about the lack of mobility that the M48 Patton has, but you do not have the same kind of turret protection. But at the same time, your gun is like just as powerful, just as potent, if not even better, because I have the feeling that the M48 Patton does lack the same gun handling. But right here we have a 116 F3. This is the tier 10 Clan Wars reward vehicle, and this shot actually went right through. And the question right now is, he actually dies, but he dies like a little belated to the artillery strike right there. And the question is, did he, like, was he on fire? Did I set him on fire, or did the Batchat 155-58 set him on fire? Because it doesn't make any sense to me that he just died right there, but after the round hit already, like, so it took like 1 or 2 seconds afterwards to show that he was killed. So the artillery must have probably set him on fire, because if we would have set him on fire, we would have gotten the kill. Either way, it's not all that important. We're wrapping up this gameplay here, and we're wrapping up the game. You can see the final FVs hiding in a bush over there, but that's not all that terrible for us, because it allows us to put one more damage shot into him and then get a whole 900 damage assisted. And yeah, I would say this is a really good tank now, a tank that is absolutely worth grinding for. And it also means that the Centurion Action, now the Centurion 9 and the Centurion 1 are both buffed, and I'm going to be checking them out in the near future. So 2 update videos on those vehicles, and then probably we're going to take a look at the British medium tank line to have it like fully gone through, because I think this line is now really, really competitive if we look at all of the changes, the buffs that they made. So either way, we're going to jump on to the next vehicle, and then we're going to go to the verdict. So let's move on. Okay, so this is probably the tank that has gotten the most buffs out of the bunch. It's the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen, which now boasts better DPM, has better dispersion values, and overall just feels like a vehicle that is much more in tune with other tier 10 light tanks, and that's a real good thing. Because I always liked to play Rheinmetal Panzerwagen, but it never really felt like it was up to date. This has always been a very good scout, even if you had to use the gun. The gun was always nice, but it just took way too long to reload this vehicle. And that has changed. This tank now has better reload time, and it just feels overall like it is much more like a mini Leopard 1, and no more like a light tank that doesn't have like a specific gimmick that makes it nice. I think this is now a tank where you can really utilize the gun to your full advantage, because it's fairly competitive in my opinion if you compare it to other light tanks, and it's also a decent scout. So that sounds to me like a massive win. Now keep in mind, light tanks, if you're using them in a combat role, are still a lot worse than medium tanks. Medium tanks do everything better in terms of doing damage than light tanks. These light tanks have worse pen, they have worse premium ammunition, they have worse DPM, and just most of the time worse alpha as well. This tank has 320 alpha instead of the usual 390 that the light tanks, the medium tanks have. But still, I think that with this change, they made this vehicle just that much more potent and a viable choice for other players who still like to play light tanks, which are, you know, good at spotting, but now you have a gun that allows you to fire off a lot more shots than you were able to do prior. This 1 second of reload that they took off the gun has really catapulted this tank forward. And as you can see, this is still a very good light tank to scout and spot with, even in a tier 10 matchup. And you can see we're just keeping these guys lit up. We're just kind of trying to keep these guys here in a position where they can't do too much harm, and slowly but surely taking away their HP so that we can push the zero line. And at the same time, we're also trying to utilize our gun, because this gun here is very competitive now. And I think it's just a tank that is really fun to use. Like, I always liked this tank before the changes even, and I like it even more now with the changes, because it feels like you can do much more, you can have much more of an impact, and it's not like the T100 LT, which has like great armor for a light tank, but just like horrible armaments, terrible ammunition in my opinion, and it just doesn't have the same kind of impact that this tank has. And look at this, I mean, this gun is incredibly reliable. Like, the dispersion value on the move when turning the vehicle and when you're stationary, these are really great, and they're a lot of fun. And yeah, basically this is a great change. It doesn't make light tanks more viable as medium tanks in terms of damage. That's still going to the medium tanks. Even in the spotting category, a lot of players would probably still prefer the Batch at 25T over a light tank, because you still have like the ability to spot and at the same time have like the ability to really do damage when you need to. And in the end, the armor kind of comes down to the same, because the Batch at 25T doesn't have any armor, and obviously the light tank doesn't have any armor. So right here, we're just kind of trying to push in to, you know, get more damage and finally put the nail in the coffin to finish this match off, because we know there are some tanks hiding down at the A line, and we want to clear them up for our guys. But look at this gun. It's reliable at range, it's reliable close by, and the reload time right here, and we're loaded again, just shows you, you know, it's much more convenient, and that is a great sign. That's a great sign that Wargaming have finally taken a moment, looked at the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen, and they thought something about this tank is just not right. It doesn't feel like it is like competitive in terms of being able to do like have the same impact as other light tanks, and that's why I prefer this version now much more. And I think that finally we have some good signs from Wargaming. But now we're just going to end up, we're going to finish this match, and we're just going to see if we can spot more guys and do more damage, because that's what you want to do now with this gun. Sadly for us, we only critically damage the Batch at 155 without doing any real damage, but we are able to finish him off because, you know, you have great gun depression values. I think it's 10 degrees, 10 or 8 degrees, one of the two. Your vehicle is really responsive. You have heat rounds that are fairly competitive as well. And the only thing you want to do now in this situation is just to do damage. You know, hit the tanks, hit them wherever you can, and fire your gun as often as you can. So that's what we're trying to do right here with this UDIS 1516. Sadly now sometimes, the rounds are not always going in. I am pretty cautious here because I'm worried of the Jagdpanzer E100, even though he was last spotted at B2 or B1, and he theoretically shouldn't be able to hit me from that distance. But at the same time, you know, you don't want to lose unnecessary HP if you can look after it, and we're just kind of trying to, you know, tie up loose ends over here. And this UDIS 1516 now, he's going to be like our last adversary, but we're still going to focus on the Lion first, because it's a tank that doesn't have a lot of armor, and we're able to do some damage to him. But sadly, as I mentioned, you're not a medium tank. You're a light tank that can do fairly good damage. Even the high explosive shells, they are really reliable, as you can see here. 100 and how much is it? 120 millimeters of penetration. That is going to allow you to cut through basically all of the medium tanks if you have their rear. Now, unfortunately, the side armor, well, it's not going to go through on some of the tanks. But still, we managed to penetrate the UDES 1516 at least once. And yeah, I think this is a really positive change. A change that has benefited this tank more. And I would have to say, maybe giving it more buffs would have made it even better. Because it's in a good state right now, but I think it could still improve further if they gave it maybe more pen. It would have elevated it into a position where it goes head to head with the Manticore. But since the Manticore doesn't have the amount of ammunition that this tank has available to it, I think it's kind of fair. So this is a very positive change. This is a good change. Finally, a tank that has been really neglected for a long time comes back and is much better, and it's a much more reliable tank. But the question still remains, should you go for the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen R tier 10 light tanks? Much better now. Are tier 10 light tanks a viable choice for doing damage or spotting? And it's kind of a maybe. It depends, because, well, as mentioned, some medium tanks do both of these things almost as good, maybe even better than light tanks at tier 10. But either way, we're going to move on to the final tank, which is the T57 Heavy, and then we're going to have a final verdict. The final tank on the list is the T57 Heavy that had some dispersion reduced, I think, and it also is faster. I am actually using this tank with a turbo, not a Bond turbo, but a turbo nonetheless. And it is quite a nice little vehicle to go forward with. This tank is just like really insane in terms of dealing a lot of damage in a short period of time, because the interclip reload is rather short, and it also has like only 21 seconds to reload. So it's going to be able to fire off quite a few rounds in a very short period of time, and it does a lot of damage. So basically, the buffs for this vehicle aren't as big, and I didn't really think it needed a lot of tinkering. But it's nice to see that this tank has some more, is a little bit more responsive now as well, like the other vehicles, and is a fairly competitive vehicle still. I haven't played the T57 Heavy in a very long time, so it was a very pleasant surprise to see that it still can do quite a bit of damage. So right here, we're playing on Studianski, and a majority of our team is kind of playing the middle there, and nobody has really gone into the city down in the south. So we only have an EBR 105 fighting for his life, and the Object 261 down here in the corner of the south. Yeah, we're just going to be trying to hold back the enemies for as long as we can without being too far at the front, so that we can still, have a little bit of protection and support from these guys here. Because in the end, you cannot really rely on your teammates. You always have to be really cautious at what you're doing, because the, trust that you have in your team sometimes is just really, really, really a bad thing to have. Because sadly, the trust is not always, returned. So, yeah, you better stay a bit further at the back, be a bit more cautious, be a bit more passive than, rely completely on your team. You can see that the EBR 105 on our team is actually still moving forward. He's kind of hiding behind a house, and I'm not really sure what he's doing there. I'm not sure if he's actively able to scout these guys or be like an early warning system. But the other EBR 105 is just, racing in between and being the annoying old EBR 105 that we all know and hate. But we at least managed to get one hit into him that does damage, and the other one just tracks him or destroys his wheel. So yeah, whenever you're playing the T57, you kind of have to be cautious, because you might run out of ammunition. This tank has like I think in total 40 rounds of ammunition. That means you can reload your clip 10 times. And since your reload time is really short, of only 21 seconds, you can basically spam your rounds out fairly quickly. So you really want to look after your ammunition, and you want to have the right ammo composition. That means for the T57 Heavy, you want to have a lot of heat rounds. You do not want to have too many AP rounds. I'm not sure if we are taking care of the EBR 105 in this round or somebody else does, but I think we kill him right here. Somebody kills him, and you can see we just wasted another 3 rounds. Only one of them connected with him, and 1 round we were able to put back into the ammunition load. But yeah, it's a bit of a weird setup. We are playing very defensively. There is not a lot of action going on down in the south. We have quite a few tanks on the A-line. AMX 13105. There's some kind of AMX 30B, I think. Do we have an AMX 30B? No, I think it's a 121B and a Stridswagen 103B. So yeah, the north is being fought for. The middle, we always have like the heavy tanks fighting it out in the tank alley there. But nobody really wants to push the south. The enemy team has also lost all of their kind of, what do you call it? All of their energy in that push, and only the EBR 105 was running around. I think that's mainly owed to the fact that we have quite a few tanks here that were able to put some shots into the tanks that we're trying to push, because we were managed to knock out the Lion and the STB-1 and the EBR 105, so that they lost quite a bit of momentum in that push when they got knocked out. But I think we do manage to move in, and we do go ham with the T57, because that's what we like to do. But yeah, if we regard the buffs, there's just not a lot to say regarding these buffs, because they are quite on the surface level, and I don't really think that these buffs have had a huge impact on the vehicle itself. But if we go back, I'm going to go look for the buff spreadsheet again real quick, so I can tell you guys exactly what the buffs were for the T57. I think that the mobility is probably the nicest addition to the T57, that they added some of the mobility into the vehicle. So let's take a quick look at the T57. They improved the reverse speed by about 2 kph, and they reduced the dispersion values when you are turning your vehicle or the turret. Right there you could see we're able to knock out the Guerrilla 15. We put, I think, 4 rounds into him, or 3 rounds. And it was a full heat clip, which was a bit of a waste. But it's one of the tanks where I never really use high explosive rounds, because it's just not worth it most of the time. But I could have loaded a high explosive clip there and clipped the Guerrilla 15. But since I do use that much ammunition in most of the games whenever I play the T57, I just don't think it's worth it. So this AMX M454, didn't really expect anyone to push. And right there we have the T57, our direct opponent, and you can just see how brutal this tank can be when you have a full clip available and ready to go in your T57. 2,832 damage dealt, 1,429 damage assisted, and now it's only a T57, a WZ-111 5A, and a Manticore that are kind of blocking our way here into the south of the map. But the question now is, what are we going to do out of this situation? Because sadly, I think we are going to screw it up big time. Centurion Action 10 is going to try to get some pop shots off at the 57, and I'm just trying to hit the Minotauro, who's on the other side, because if I can actually knock out the Minotauro from here, that would be of great benefit for my team that is fighting for that alley there. But unfortunately, the second round just hits nothing but a building. So yeah, now it's all about the waiting game, because both teams have kind of eliminated a lot of HP on both sides. Nobody is really trying to push anything, because the amount of HP that has been lost really hinders our survivability, or the chances of survivability when we are going to be pushing something. So we're quite passive. But we do have a batch at 25T who's almost full HP. We have a Centurion Action 10 here, and we have a T57 who is half-life. So basically, right now, if we play our cards right, we can take on the T57 and the WZ-111. But the one issue that we see here is that the batch at 25T rushes the T57 without alerting us that he's going to be pushing, and he manages to get into a position where the T57 actually knocks or almost knocks out the Batchet, and now I didn't reload my clip. I forgot all about that because I was expecting to still be able to maybe get those 2 shots off, and now we're running into a situation where we are out in the open at the mercy of artillery and the Italian Minotauro that we shot prior. And you can see that the Centurion Action 10 and the Batchet 25T have both died, and we have completely lost hold of this flank in a very short amount of time, even though we were only going up against 2 vehicles at that time. So not a very good scenario, not a very good situation, but I can assure you that this game is going to be more interesting because the remaining enemy team is fairly low on HP, as you can see, and the Mouse and the AMX-13-105 managed to take out the Minotauro and the Badger, and this AMX-13-105 is going to have quite a bit of an impact on the Jagdpanzer E100 and the Leopard 1 that are still here. But one thing that the enemy team does have an advantage of is that they control more of the map. They have the south now that they control. And if the Manticore plays it right, he can actually spot the Object 268 for the WZ-111. And he could probably win this round for them. If they clean up the object, they can take out the artillery and the Mouse, because they would still be pinned in that position. But it looks like that our team is really going to grasp the chance here, because they still have much more HP than the rest of the enemy team. That always kind of reminds me, whenever I see an AMX-13-105, it kind of reminds me that I should be playing this tank again. Sadly for us, though, that this Object 268 is going to get knocked out by the Leopard 1, I think. Pretty sure that he's not going to survive this ordeal here. Or he actually does, which is quite funny. But we still have that Jagdpanzer E100 who is in that position that is really kind of annoying for most of the tanks. But if artillery just focuses on him, well, it probably is going to be a win for us. I'm going to speed this up a little bit because we're not here to talk about all of the gameplays. We're talking about the buffs. And I have to say that I think the majority of the buffs in this patch have been well received. But the only thing that I noticed that I have to critique is that the buffs for the Rinoceronte could have been more adapt and better chosen, because in my personal opinion, the Rinoceronte does not need more turret armor there. It needs more armor on top of the gun mantlet, where the gun is actually has that little notch, and the Rinoceronte needs more DPM. I think if you give the vehicle that, it's going to be a very balanced, nice vehicle to play. Maybe improve the alpha damage a bit or increase the reload time, and the vehicle itself is going to be a much, much more rewarding experience than it is right now. Other than that, I think the patch did give most of the vehicles a little bit of a nudge towards being more competitive, especially the Rheinmetal Panzerwagen. That buff was sorely needed. And I think maybe now it's time to also buff some other vehicles that are not tier 10 only. It would be great to see buffs to more tech tree vehicles, and I think Wargaming are doing that right now, and I like to see it. Most of the buffs have been good. Some of the nerfs have been really weird, especially the Progetto 65 is a really weird buff, a really weird nerf, and the AMX 65T, because both of these tanks, I didn't really think that they were kind of overperforming in their areas, but Wargaming decided to still nerf them. Either way, this was a very, very long video, and I hope you still enjoyed it. Tell me what you guys think about the boss and the nerfs, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.